We are excited. We would love to be in sunny San Diego with Warwicks, but we'll settle for Facebook Live. But we're so glad to be with you all tonight, and definitely appreciate your support. For all of those new to us, we are ready to engage you in this conversation. Those of you who aren't so new to us, we're ready to engage you in this conversation. We're ready to move this thing forward tonight. And so our book Wounds is really kind of it's our child. It's our child, me and Daniel's baby. And we worked on this diligently, and I'm sure he'll give you some more of the backstory on it. But I will say that it was birthed out of pain, as everything that is worth being birthed is birthed out of pain. And in response and in reaction to Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, in response to these murders, these senseless murders based on race, our social media presences collided. So it's um, it's perfect that we are here in that same kind of space, Facebook space, because that's where this thing came into existence. That's where the idea manifested. And so tonight we're excited to talk to you a little bit more about the book, certain themes of the book that you'll see. We really have been focusing a lot on helping individuals to develop their own ability to navigate culture, cultural intelligence, cultural navigation, that ability to go into situations where you are different. And notice I say it that way, instead of you thinking of it as everyone else is different, where you are different, where to be able to go into those situations and successfully navigate those situations is a meaningful skill, talent, ability to have. But most people are unwilling to do the work to develop it. That work of cultural immersion. It is through immersion in both of our lives that that cultural navigation ability was birthed. So we were immersed in a town together where we did actually meet was in northwestern Michigan, in a small town I was living called White Cloud. Daniel moved 10 miles up the road to a town called Newaygo and eventually moved to White Cloud, which you'll hear about tonight when he reads his chapter. But in the process, what we found out is that we were definitely different, that we were unique. I was one of two African Americans in my kindergarten class. We went up and down the waves, the ebbs and flows throughout the matriculation. And then I was one of two African Americans in my graduating class. And so being immersed in a culture, in a white culture, a white environment, forced me to develop some abilities to successfully navigate culture and difference, which in turn, there were a lot of wounds. There was a lot of pain, but those wounds built ability and led to a whole career path, a whole purpose, kind of a life work, if you will, of being able to help others to develop that ability to navigate difference, to stand up against racial inequalities, to stand up against racism, discrimination, hate in all of its forms. And so that's what this book is doing. It's trying to look at the wounds that many of us have experienced from being different, whether that's a different personality, a different mindset, a different religion, a different, whatever it is, each one of us can find a way that in our environments, we're often the only one. And so to develop that into an ability that can produce fruit, that can broaden our life experiences, that can help us to see the fuller picture of the reality of life, has been a meaningful part of my life. And that's what we're trying to accomplish in this, to help hopefully some small segment, whatever segment we can reach, maybe some big segment, if we can reach a big segment of the world to be better than we found it. That's each of our responsibilities. That's each of our call to use our skills, talents, and abilities to make sure that we're making our mark and that we're making our sphere better. And so, yeah, that's a little bit of what we're here talking about tonight. And I'm going to turn it over to Daniel to do whatever he feels like doing.
Uh, I'll say that, well, thank you, Razel.
No problem.
I have lived quite an unusual life for a white man. At 17, I moved in with a Black family and was raised and loved by a single Black mother for the last 2 years of my high school career. I'm married to a Black woman. I have 8 biracial children, and I've had the privilege and the horror of viewing racial inequality firsthand. And my goal in writing this book, well, one of my goals is to be a witness to the things that I've experienced and to share my stories in hopes that my fellow white Americans can take action as well, to use their skills, talents, and abilities, their spheres of influence, and also to let my fellow Black Americans know and my fellow people of color know that you're not alone. And I'll dive right into the chapter. The chapter is called Black Love. It takes place shortly after I got into some trouble at a racially homogenous high school and moved in with this family that I referenced earlier. Black Love, White Cloud, Michigan, 1994. In the weeks following my arrest, I'd been to court twice. The assault and battery charges stuck. I was given the choice of 3 days in jail or 20 hours of community service. I chose the latter, and months later, when the weather swayed warm, I would serve my time painting curbs yellow in downtown White Cloud. My second time in court, my parents signed over custody to Diane Cartwright. Diane was all business at the proceedings, showing the world what she always showed the world: nothing. She was a Black woman taking on the legal responsibility of raising a white child, yet she showed no visible emotion, stone-faced, but with this defiant strength, like it was the world that had failed, not me. Like she would fix the mess that Nuego made of me. My mom was teary-eyed and reluctant, but she had strength of her own. She let me go because she wanted me to graduate high school. School of choice was more difficult to get back then. I'd learn later she'd sometimes cry on the drive home after coming to visit me. I was her oldest child, her son, she told me, and she wanted me home. She didn't understand that for the first time since we left Grand Rapids, I was home. That battered trailer in White Cloud, Michigan was home. We lived poor on Tulip Street. Back then, food stamps were still paper. We peeled them from our pockets and swallowed the judgmental looks from white cashiers in White Cloud grocery stores, eyes trying to figure me out. Mom Cartwright with that 1,000-mile stare, a look that said she'd been around the block and back around the block again. Those that thought they were better than us were beneath her. That's what her eyes told me. Those dying to ask questions about the white son with the Black mother, me bagging her groceries, carrying her groceries, calling her ma. Those questions weren't asked, not to Diane Cartwright. Her demeanor let the world know there would be no questions, no answers. Give me my change and get to stepping. Just give me my change. That was for people who didn't matter. If Diane Cartwright loved you, she spoke her mind, whether you were interested in hearing it or not. Her delivery had an edge, like her voice had a scowl. When she was mad at you, she'd get quiet for a while and comments would leak out a little at a time beneath her breath, almost like she was arguing with two halves of her whole self. Then, once that argument was settled, she came at you full force, mostly making no sense. Diane Cartwright wasn't the most articulate person in the world when she was pissed off, and she wasn't one to apologize with words, only with actions. She'd cook for you, give you a few dollars, but she never said, "I'm sorry." I knew Diane Cartwright for almost 30 years, and I don't recall a time she said those words, "I'm sorry," not to me, not to anyone else. Diane was a single mother of 4. Crystal, my age, was a grade ahead of me in school. Latrice was 2 years younger than me. Denny was 12 then, and Candy was 9 when I moved in with the Cartwrights in 1994. It didn't take long for Denny and I to become brothers. We slept foot to head in his twin-sized bed. We sang 90s R&B songs off key, taking turns on the solo parts, doing the chorus together. Song after song, Gangsta Lean by DRS, If I Ever Fall in Love Again by Shy, Bump and Grind by R. Kelly. We'd go on like that until we heard Mom's footsteps, until she'd yell from the back room for us to shut the hell up. Or, "Denny, shut your black ass up." Always followed with the long pause. She was probably lighting a Newport, shaking her head the way she liked to do before she smiled, half joking, half serious. Denny and I would fill that space with laughter. "D, you can shut your white ass up too." It was wintertime when I moved into that trailer on Tulip Street. We made a basketball hoop out of a bent metal coat hanger and wedged it in the front door. We played one-on-one with a wad of socks folded into a ball, pretending to dribble, shooting jumpers from across the room. I was still able to bully Denny a little back then, dunk after dunk, until he got mad, until he stepped onto the black marble coffee table and drop-kicked me in the jewels. Denny laughed at me when I collapsed to the floor. He's still laughing at me today. Me and my brother still laugh about that incident today. Latrice and I were friends before I moved in. She was dating Robert Trice, a friend of mine, one of Stevie's teammates at that basketball court we met at in Kent City a few years before. Latrice and I moved in the same circles. We grew closer in my time at the house, got into trouble together for missing curfew, got put on punishment together, faced Mom's wrath together. Years later, our kids would grow up together, grow up as cousins, get into trouble of their own. Candy was my baby sister. In those years at the Cartwrights, on those nights when Stevie couldn't leave the house, or I didn't feel like going out, I spent time with Candy. We'd play two-hand spades, rummy, or Monopoly, though we were hardly ever able to get through a game without arguing. Sometimes I'd let her climb on my back when I did push-ups. We'd eat snacks, watch movies, we'd hang. Me and baby sister would hang. Krista wasn't home much. She was a senior at White Cloud and focused on her grades and church and Razel. Raj was dating Crystal at the time. He was in his freshman year at Grand Valley State. My earliest memories of Raj are of him pulling up in a white Ford Ranger to pick up Crystal for whatever mischief they were into back then. He'd bring Candy string cheese, wrestle with Denny, show him that Jones strength when Denny tried him. Denny always liked to try him. I'd see Razel on Sundays too. He played keys at the Church of God in Christ, the rickety God shack Mom Cartwright dragged us to every Sunday. Whoever was home on Sunday morning had to go. Somehow it was always me. Or Stevie, if he stayed the night on Saturday, which he often did. The Cartwright kids usually found a way to be gone, but I didn't know any better. Church was murder, hard wooden pews, hours and hours of preaching. Elder Smith had a way of piercing your soul with his eyes, made you feel like you did something wrong and had you analyzing your week. That scent of food cooking in the kitchen, the pangs of the stomach, the wait to eat was excruciating. I coped by bringing a notebook. I wrote raps in the back of the sanctuary, basketball raps, anger raps, fighting raps. A couple years later, Razel and I would record a gospel song together. He'd lay the track and I'd spit over the beat. Our boy Jamar would sing the vocals. Connections, man, so many connections. God works in intentional ways. For years, Razel and I would be out of touch. Eventually, we'd marry sisters. I'd become the white uncle to his beautiful black daughter, Caden. He'd become the black uncle to my 8 beautiful biracial children, my 4 biracial sons, my 4 biracial moons. Back then, though, what I remember most about Raj is he was always there for Mom Cartwright, always there for the family. Always, he was there. He'd take Mom to the doctor or to get groceries. He'd bring Latrice home from basketball practice, volleyball practice, track practice. He was always around, a provider, even at that young age, a man-child. I looked up to him. I still look up to him. I remember one night I came home and Mom was asleep on the couch with a cigarette hanging from her mouth. An arc of ash hung from a Newport butt. Her mouth was half open. Her eyes rolled back in her head. Because her chest rose and fell, I knew she was alive. I plucked the cigarette butt from her lips and dropped it into the ashtray atop a graveyard of other nubbed out corpses. I blew the ashes off of her t-shirt and covered her with a blanket. I sat at her feet and watched her sleep. I didn't know yet about the debilitating headaches, about the other things, the vices. All I knew was I loved her and I didn't want to see her in pain. We lived poor. I remember one time Mom Cartwright needed a ride to the hospital and didn't have a car. She seemed to never have a car. That day, she didn't have the gas money her so-called friend required for the 15-mile drive to Fremont. This so-called friend lived down the street from us. It was wintertime. Their driveway had already been plowed. I helped Mom Cartwright shovel their yard because work was required from this so-called friend. This woman watched from the window while Mom and I shoveled snow off her grass. Mom listened to me complain about the absurdity of what we were doing, but she didn't join in. Mom Cartwright did what the white woman required. We never had much, but we never went hungry. Mom always came up with a $3 admission to my basketball games my senior year at White Cloud. She never missed a game, never held her tongue, ignored the plays that brought the crowd to her feet, and focused instead on the times I forgot to box out or the times I'd stopped to talk trash instead of getting back on defense. Mom Cartwright told it as she saw it, never sugarcoated, never watered down. I'd go on to make all area honorable mention. We beat Newaygo for the conference championship, and I dropped 16 points, 8 rebounds, and 8 assists. I'd shake hands with my former teammates, guys who played no role in my negative experience at that school. The coach would look away when I approached him in the sportsmanship line. He wouldn't shake my hand. I made sure to find his eyes during our celebration, though, when it was my turn to cut down the net. He didn't return my smile. Well, my smirk, if I'm being honest. I lived with the Cartwrights for over 2 years. I revisit those years often. I think about that transitional period of my life, the Newaygo experience, the seed of distrust for people with white skin, the safety I felt in Diane Cartwright's home, the love. I'd go on to date the full spectrum of women, Black, biracial, Puerto Rican, Costa Rican, Mexican, Korean, the occasional white girl. But I married a Black woman. My wife is a Black woman. I feel safe with a Black woman, understood with a Black woman. I know that comfort was developed during my time in the Cartwright house. I came into that house low, confused, and uncomfortable in my skin. She showed me love during a time when I felt unloved, stitches on wounds, a soul hug. I was allowed to breathe. I breathed. As I write this, Diane Cartwright has been gone just over 5 months. This is hard to write. Not because Mom moved on, everyone moves on. Not because I miss her. Of course I miss her. But because I'd allowed the busyness of my life to get in the way of picking up a phone. Because I never took the time to take that short drive up US 131 to visit her in Cedar Springs, where she'd lived the last several years of her life around her daughters, her sons-in-law, and her grandkids. I never thought to ask why she took me in, why she took a chance on the white boy with the hot temper, why, when she barely had enough for her own children, she found enough for me. I never told her what she meant to me. I never knew what I meant to her. I don't know if I was different than the countless other knuckleheads she'd mothered over the years. I do know that I was the only one legally hers. I know she believed I was worth it, that I was better than the way I was perceived by the world, the way I perceived myself. She saw the best in me before I saw the best in me. I was broken when I met her, and to say she fixed me would be an exaggeration. I'm still fixing me. My wife is fixing me. My children are fixing me. God stays fixing me. I'm still not fixed. I am and always will be a work in progress. What's not an exaggeration is that a Black woman showed a white boy unconditional love. A Black woman taught a white boy how to unconditionally love. Diane Cartwright saw me as God sees me, as a masterpiece. The last time I saw her alive was at Razel's brother's funeral in July of 2019. It was a hard day. Seeing Razel hurt that way was difficult. Mom sat beside me and my wife Vanessa and our son Jude. She didn't hold my distance against me. We settled in beside each other because we've always settled in beside each other. After the service, I hugged her and kissed her on the cheek. She scolded me for not bringing her grandbabies around. I smiled, started to make an excuse before she cut me that eye. The same eye she used to cut me when I was 17 and learning her pet peeves. I better speak when I come in the house. Don't set my hat on the table and say, huh, don't say what. The last words I said to Diane Cartwright were, I love you. She said she loved me back. What an honor that she loved me back. Thank you.
I'm going to read a chapter entitled The Anonymous Poster, Spring Hill, Tennessee, 2020. In the weeks following my brother's death, we mourned, we grieved. Junior was the first immediate family member we'd lost. We hurt, we cried, we remembered. We were comforted by the words of loved ones and friends, even by the words of people we didn't know, but knew Junior. It was uplifting to know that he had touched people's lives for the better. He had been elusive with us. We didn't know what he was doing a lot of the time, but the condolences of strangers filled in some of the gaps. They let us in on more of his story. As people reflected on his life, I learned of how he helped coworkers get through the stress of their days with wise perspective and a realization that there was life beyond the job. How he would see a familiar face on the city bus and offer a smile to brighten their day. How he was willing to fearlessly fight to protect his true friends. How he bragged about me to people I didn't really know. How proud he was of my accomplishments. Confirmations of his belief that I could do no wrong. In the months that came after his death, we experienced more death, more loss, more pain. We lost our community mom, Diane Cartwright, my godmother, Lyra Jackson. Then COVID-19 took the lives of over 150,000 and counting people, including my pastor, our church leader in White Cloud, Bishop Robert Smith, Sr. Then from one pandemic to another, we began to see a series of unnecessary, racially motivated murders, starting with Mr. Ahmaud Arbery. More deaths, more pain. In some ways, I could relate to the family of Mr. Arbery. In some ways, I couldn't. Mr. Arbery was out for a jog. Mr. Arbery stopped and looked at the construction of a house being built in his neighborhood. Mr. Arbery was murdered by two white men, citizens. Not the owners of the house being framed and built, not the police. Neighbors murdered him based on a suspicion that he'd done something wrong. There was no arrest, no trial, no jury, no verdict, and no appeal. Just an execution. Execution for the crime of being Black in their neighborhood, in his neighborhood. Racial violence, racial murder, first-degree privilege, happening so often, serial privilege. The morning I looked up the dates of birth and death for Mr. Arbery, I stumbled upon his obituary on the Chavez B. Johnson and Reed Funeral Home's website. They handled his final services and remains. As I read the comments on Mr. Arbery's tribute page, I thought of when my brother died. I thought about the honor I had to be asked to deliver the eulogy for Mom Cartwright. I tried to use my words to comfort my friends, my family, my community. I thought of when I officiated my godmother's celebration of life. With everything in me, even though I was hurting, I desired to provide comfort to my godfather, my godbrothers, my family, my community. I thought about how COVID-19 hadn't allowed us to gather to have the type of celebration merited by the life of my pastor, but how we still were able to share stories, engage memories, and offer encouragement to his sons and wife, my family, my community. I recall the comfort our families felt when kind words were shared about our deceased loved ones. This helped us smile through the pain. It was the love we felt, the funny memories, the stories of how our loved ones had contributed to other people's joy. Those factors helped begin the ongoing process of healing. The words didn't take the pain totally away, but those words helped us. They helped me. I wept for Mr. Arbery and his family and friends as I read comments from cowardly and anonymous posters writing statements on his tribute wall, like he shouldn't have been stealing, on a page for his family and friends to memorialize him. Paralysis. That was the likely intent of the heartless comments, and unfortunately, their mission was accomplished. I couldn't move. All I could do was think. Mr. Arbery's family was robbed of their loved one and then robbed of the comfort the tribute wall was designed to provide. Why would one feel the need or the liberty to trespass on such a space, to spew the venom of judgment on this dead man and his living, grieving family? There is only one reason I can imagine: hate. The kind of hate that causes irrational actions for no defined purpose. The kind of hate that causes one to ignore human feelings and cross over reasonable social boundaries to attack the legacy of an individual and disrupt the healing process of human beings that you likely don't even know. This is hate based on skin color and melanin counts. Hate based on ignorance and fear of the unknown. Hate based on inaccurate and inappropriate feelings. Feelings of domination, superiority, supremacy, feelings that still exist in our country. Our country. The comments didn't stop there. The next posted by a hateful assumed name, F#jogger, sarcastically stated his passionate drive to learn about architecture and jogging in basketball shoes led him to an early demise. RIP, not RIP, RIP jogger. Followed by another from assumed name Nick Gurr. Say it aloud with me and you'll notice that it's a play on that detestable slur created by slave owners, which was passed down through generational curses, generational ignorance, and continues to invoke anger and communicate hate. Nick Gurr's tribute reads, "Good night, sweet prince. May you jog forever in heaven's housing developments. #Black Lives Matter." Then the next, "Jog on, King. You were a good boy who didn't do nothing. RIP in peace." Don't miss the intentional use of the double negative, which comes back again in a later comment. He was a good boy. He didn't do nothing. First of all, applying the downgrading term boy to this 25-year-old man, just as slave owners and the generations that followed have addressed Black men in times past. Further, through the double negative, implying that Mr. Arbery did indeed do something to deserve his death, and using mocking language implying that Mr. Arbery's mourners and all Black people speak like slaves. Slaves, our ancestors who were denied education and did the best they could to learn and apply a language that was not their native tongue. Finally, don't excuse the rest in peace, as this hateful individual and individuals of his or her kind willfully acknowledge their lack of desire for Mr. Arbery, Mr. Arbery's family and friends, and Black people in general to have peace, instead wishing them to lay in the foul, malodorous stench of peas. Yet others, in between many positive expressions of sympathy, empathy, and hope, posted fictionalized stories of made-up actions and scenarios they described as participating in with Mr. Arbery, involving theft, drugs, trespassing, and the like. Another stating his guilt, while yet another states He's jogging through construction sites in heaven. Many of these comments are veiled with intentions not easily understood at first read or first glance, similar to the operation of systemic racism and hate, covered with microaggressions and defenses like, I didn't mean it that way, and you should stop playing the race card. This veiled monster inhabits the daily life of the person of color. Mind you, that hate, those comments were posted on the site intended to bring comfort, peace, and healing to a family and friends mourning the loss of their son, their brother, uncle, nephew, and friend. There were more comments, but I finally had to close the page after emailing the funeral home requesting that they please pull down the hurtful, ridiculous comments. I cried, I vented to Daniel, I vented to Camille. I laid on her shoulder and I cried. Then I wrote. That personal, intimate space was invaded with vicious, hurtful words by heartless, racist people who felt entitled to speak, to joke, to mock, and to degrade this man and his loved ones. I believe the anonymous posters treated Mr. Arbery and his family as products of that ancient constitutional belief that they were 3/5 human. As I read the comments, I quickly realized it was time for me to begin that work necessary for a Black person to keep going to work, to the store, to the school, to continue functioning in a white world. I knew that I had to do the work of not doing what many white people have done to me. I had to calm myself, separate myself, and combat the thoughts that lured me to the simple yet ignorant reaction of judging all white people based on the heinous actions of some, hating all white people, blaming all white people, excluding all white people. Once again, I could not allow the actions of some to defile my view of all. How I wish everyone would do that work. Stop seeing me as the stereotypical image you've come across in the media or the one individual who wronged you. Just because one committed a wrong does not mean that all are guilty. It is this lumping, this grouping, this stereotyping that simple minds use as a shortcut. Instead of building meaningful relationships, rather than pressing past the tendency to assume the next will be just like the last, simple-minded people limit their exposure to new experiences because of the negativity entangled in the previous experience. If you do that, you are the one missing out. If I do that, I am the one missing out. Missing out on the richness of connection to people with different experiences, knowledge, personalities, and practices. Shoving myself into a box of broken mirrors where my life is consumed with experiencing people who act, feel, look, and live in a sadly generic way just like me. The broken mirror produces cuts, gashes, fragmented reflections of oneself, wounds. These commenters didn't consider Mr. Arbery human. They didn't consider his family and friends human. And this is the reality and the context that people of color have to face and live within on a daily basis. The anonymous posters are our distanced neighbors, our distrusting coworkers, our detached classmates. We are left to wonder, is the anonymous poster the white guy I pass in the grocery store who does not acknowledge my presence, looking like he hopes I don't engage him? Is the anonymous poster the white supervisor who keeps overlooking me for the assignment, the promotion, the responsibility? Is the anonymous poster the business owner who follows me around the store, expecting that I'm going to steal the products that I plan to purchase? Is the anonymous poster the teacher who seems to keep giving me a hard time and poor review in the classroom while condoning the actions of the white students who are clearly not performing well? Is the anonymous poster the government official who calls brown and black protesters thugs and criminals, threatening to shoot them while referring to white protesters as good people, even when they are white nationalists in places like Charlottesville carrying tiki torches to emulate the historic and current burning torches of the KKK, or carrying AK-47s and AR-15s to the state capitol building in Michigan to voice disgust with a woman in power. Who is the anonymous poster? Is it you?
I just want to clap. That was two of the most powerful and excellent readings I think we've hosted here at Warwick. So thank you both
Thanks,
very
Julie.
much. You have a lot of love and comments that are coming in. Lots of people that you know sharing that they're, thank you for sharing those stories. Carolyn Ogburn has a question for you. And it's for both of you. So maybe we'll start, you guys decide who will start with the answer first. Did writing this book, born of anger, frustration, grief, help you feel more at ease about current injustices, or did it cause you to notice injustices more acutely? How did writing these essays change how you see what goes on every day, if it did?
I can start with this one. Hi, Carolyn. She's a classmate from my MFA program at VCFA. Phenomenal writer too. My early drafts of this book required a lot of editing. I was writing, we started writing this book about, it must have been 2 weeks after the execution of George Floyd. And we both decided to write this book feeling like enough is enough and we need to do something. So I was writing angry, and I was revisiting a lot of childhood trauma. And so my early drafts were like a guy that ripped his shirt, picked up a baseball bat, and was like, who wants what? And Razel and our editor, publisher, Brooks Rexbro was like, you can't do this. You can't. And eventually the anger turned into reflection. Reflection turned into self-actualization. And I don't know that I learned anything different about the things that are going on right now, but I learned a lot about myself and what I've been through and who I've become, and a lot of the reasons for why I've become who I am. And I know my role and my responsibility now when dealing with racial inequality. I'd always been, but I'm introverted by nature and I'm very private. And like these conversations that we're having about this book, I've been having with close friends and family for a long time, but I never felt like it was my responsibility to step out in the forefront and share my experiences. And I know now that it is my responsibility to do so as a white man who's seen this, because if you're a white American living in a white neighborhood in a very white world, you have a hard time believing a lot of this stuff is going on. And as a white man who gets to step out in public without my family and without my friends and see the difference between how I step in the world as a white man and how I step in the world holding my wife's hand or with my children, I'm received differently depending on who I'm with. And like I said, it's my responsibility to do something, and I'm a writer. So this book is my action.
Yeah, it was a great question, Carolyn. The only thing I would add is Writing it caused me to go back in my mind and bring up thoughts and feelings that I figured out in the process that I had repressed, suppressed, and any kind of press down that you can do to get rid of them in order to survive. Now, the reality of the situations, the racial violence, is that they aren't new. This isn't the first time that people have inflicted violence upon people because of the color of their skin, right? We have a country, that's our whole history. That's it's unfortunately fairly commonplace. And kind of as a person of color, for survival, what you tend to do is say, you know what, this sucks, but I got to find a way to keep positive. I got to find a way to keep moving. I got to find a way to maintain who I am in spite of the fact that things are trying to make me someone else, whatever it may be. And so it was therapeutic. Another thing Daniel and I have talked about a lot, both of us tend to be leaders in situations that we're in. And so when you're a leader and when you're helping other people through trauma, which is part of my job and part of my passion, you don't always let them in on every one of your thoughts. So there's a level of transparency and vulnerability that comes with writing stories like this that impacted me in a different way than writing other stuff, because what I had to do is let you see what I'm really thinking. In order for me to bring you into the story, in order for you to understand where we're trying to go, I have to let you in on the real thoughts, those thoughts that I fight against, those thoughts that are at war in me, those thoughts like where I get mad at white people, where I need a day off, versus those days where I'm processing it and I'm in a good place and I'm able to say, this isn't everybody. Let me not do what has been done to us. Let me not lump. Let me not group. So yeah, it's been an interesting, therapeutic, sometimes painful, but very emotional process.
And, hats off to both of you for doing this, because it is one of those things that for our country to move forward, every voice needs to get out. I mean, we need as many people doing this as possible, and making it not be that it is more what is the word, I'm stumbling over my words, but that
Hopeful.
we need hopeful, but we need all the stories out there. We need to know as many voices as we can talking and bringing all of this up and out and educating. I mean, it shouldn't fall on everybody to educate, but we have to. Right. And we sort of have to take it upon all of us to keep bringing these messages out and forward. So thank you for doing that. And as personal and hard as it is, it's so important. And I think the more personal it is, the more we all relate to it. Right. I mean, Daniel, like with your stories, it's just like people, we bring it into that very personal position, that I think that as, it is a book, and as readers, that's what our reading community looks for too, is that personal. Okay, let's see. We got a couple more questions coming in. So they were slow coming, and now they're coming fast and furious. So, Susan, this is a tough one. So I'm going to throw it to both of you. What is your response when someone says, quote, "all lives matter"? Told you it was a tough one.
I'll give that to Daniel. I know he's prepared for this.
Oh, is he? This is the question of questions. And honestly, I've seen a lot of memes on social media that explain it very well. It's what's that cancer meme, Raj? You remember that? The one where they wear pink for Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and saying all lives matter when Black Americans are getting murdered based on the color of their skin is like having pancreatic cancer or having leukemia or whatever it might be, and getting pissed off because people are wearing pink during Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Like, you have to be able to acknowledge that there's a problem. And saying that all lives matter is immediately dismissing the problem that we have in this country. And like I referenced earlier, and let me just rewind just a little bit. I believe that most people believe that racism is wrong. I believe that. The problem that we have is because we've had a Black president, because we now have a Black vice president, a Black female vice president, white people who live in a very white bubble are like, oh, we can't possibly be racist anymore because they aren't seeing it. But as a white man who has been in situations like a situation I write about in the book, I was 14 years old and the only white kid in the car, and I got pulled over, and my 3 Black friends were face down on the concrete, handcuffed, and I was sitting on the side of the road watching. You know, that happened. I was in the car with them. Nobody did anything wrong. White people were driving by this scene with their children, with their spouses. And when they're seeing this scene, what they're witnessing in their minds are 3 Black criminals being brought to justice. They aren't witnessing racial injustice. They're like, what did they do wrong? And then they see the white guy sitting on the side of the road, and I'm probably the victim in their eyes. And that's not actually what happened. And that's the importance of stories. When, you know, Razel could put on a suit and tie and do a 2-hour presentation about race theory, and half the room would nod off like, yeah, this guy full of crap. Mm-hmm. But when you share your real stories of what you've experienced, you can't deny. And the more we all share our stories and our experiences and affect people on a personal and on an emotional and on a human level, that's when change begins. It begins at a micro level within the family. It extends to the school system, to the community. And it begins with identifying with other people, caring about other people, and acknowledging there's a problem. And all lives matter, in summary, dismisses the problem.
Yep. And it's what I find very frustrating is I try to explain to people what white privilege is, and they have a very hard time. I didn't grow up with money. It's like, no, it's got nothing to do with money, you know. And so I get so frustrated with that one too. Yeah. The privilege. And I said, you're not getting it. You're not getting it. And it's so, but like I said, we just got to keep talking. Got to keep talking and having the conversation. Okay, next question from Mary. Wait 1 second here. Are you working to change things in the communities that are mentioned in your book? If you are, what are you doing to help Newaygo County accept diversity?
Well, I think Razel should start with some of the exciting stuff that we have going on with the state of Michigan right now, because that's been the really surprising thing about this book. And I'll just let Razel take it.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. Well, number one, yes, directly in Newaygo County. We've had events, we've partnered with the Fremont Area Community Foundation and done talks like these and different things like that to try to impact our great home community. If you don't help home, you're not really doing much. But then what Daniel's referring to, interesting things have happened where we've gotten some calls from state government, which isn't something that always happens, especially on these topics. But we've gotten some calls and have done some talks and some training and some readings and different things for the unit that handles child support, friend of the court, oversees friend of the court for the state. And then in addition to that, we just had this week a session where we discussed the book and the topics related to the book with the Treasury Department. And, you know, getting inquiries from people who are connected to the governor's office and just various things. For one, because our book is very locational. So it's a very geographic book. I mean, we talk about the cities we're in, you know, small northwestern Michigan towns, but then also Grand Rapids and Kentwood and these places in Michigan that we love, that are home. And so that's been an interesting thing, you know, getting interest from Michigan book groups and reading groups that we have going on, which is really cool. So yes, we're doing everything that we can in our power to impact home. Even though, for instance, I've moved 600 miles away, it's still home, and anything that we can do to make that better for individuals who are going through the childhood growth processes and such that we experience, hopefully we'll do the same. And so different schools, Fremont schools, Newaygo schools, White Cloud schools have contacted us, and some of the teachers are using it with their courses, with their classes and things like that. So it's been a really cool experience. We even had a Michigan Girl Scout troop that has engaged us on different things. So it's been really cool.
Because that's the thing too that happens is like it can seem overwhelming because the problem is so huge. I mean,
Right.
it's so huge, and it's still
Right.
after all these years, it still doesn't seem to be, you know.
Yeah.
But so bringing it into that very personal and very local level and impacting that little bit at a time, and then it seems to blossom from there.
Right.
Yeah.
For
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so Tom, let's go back to Tom's question. Or Tim, sorry, Tim, called you Tom. Okay, clearly this has impacted each of you deeply from a unique perspective for each of you. What's the greatest takeaway that you have learned from this experience or collection of experiences?
The greatest takeaway. Those are always tough questions for me when we throw the superlative in. Uh,
Yeah.
and so I have to start ranking that. But
Yeah, it's
for
hard to write.
one, right. For one, it is the power of vulnerability. And I referred to it a little bit earlier, but the power of vulnerability. Again, many times you feel, especially when you're in a leadership role, you feel like, well, maybe I shouldn't say the parts that aren't going to make me look so good, because then I'll lose my influence. But it's actually the opposite. When people can touch and feel your stories, when they can resonate, then they begin to say, oh, okay, it's not just me. He also has these feelings. I know, you know, people think that, you know, people have it all together. But to be able to show, no, I'm processing this stuff just like everybody else. This stuff impacts me just like everybody else. Empowers somebody else to, again, be able to share how they're really feeling, and where they are. And once we've had people contact us, I've had old friends that I referred to in the book, some by name, some not by name, contact me like, man, I had no idea this was happening. I was right with you throughout K-12 and I had no idea. That's been an interesting thing, the importance of being vulnerable and sharing. Sometimes people can't relate because you haven't let them relate. You haven't given them anything to grab hold to. So I encourage everybody, tell your stories. Listen, Daniel and I are just two regular, ordinary people who told our stories. There are so many people who have more stories than us, sometimes more egregious stories than what we've experienced. But if you just bottle it up and keep it to yourself, then your wound will only wound you. Our wounds are beginning to heal other people.
And for me, what's been the most rewarding and beautiful thing about not writing the book, but putting the book out there and letting it be read is people that previously were denying that this stuff didn't exist are now not only acknowledging it, but we've been contacted by at least a dozen people saying that they're going to make the word make their children read the book.
Right.
And like, to me, I said it earlier, but change starts at the family level. And when people are taking that action, you don't, racism has been around forever. And yet here it is. because it keeps getting passed on from generation to generation. But when you kill it at the family level, that's a beautiful thing. And it feels like our reach is our arms are becoming a lot longer than we anticipated when we took on the challenge of writing this book. And it's been beautiful. I love hearing that they're passing it on to their children.
Well, and I think that the thing that becomes evergreen about it too is that they're authentic, and you're not like, that's what comes through in both of your stories, is that it's not embellishment. It's not, trying to be, something that it's not. It's authentic from your hearts, and you can feel that. And I think that that's where the success and what will come from this on a broader scale than just the local will eventually keep happening. Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and this one's sort of a little broader question. So Amanda wants to know, she'd love to know what both of these authors are reading. If any recent books, either fiction or nonfiction, they'd recommend in the realm, besides yours, in the realm of racial justice.
Sure. Well, for me, my favorite book lately was actually written by a friend, a former colleague I worked with in Michigan, by the name of Austin Channing Brown. And her book is entitled, "I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Built for Whiteness." Phenomenal book. I love the authenticity, the emotion, the power of how she conveys stories. The interesting thing is I read it after we wrote Wounds, actually. So I started seeing the crossover and in the stories, like, oh man, me and Austin grew up in the same kind of settings. And it produced these same kinds of abilities and these same kinds of pain. So that's my favorite. Also, I mean, it's very popular. I'm sure you're aware of this one already, but Dr. Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, the theoretical side, he's got that covered. If you need race theory, if you need to think on a very cognitive level, it is phenomenal. He tells stories too, but his theoretical approach, I mean, even if you don't totally agree with it, you can't really argue that much with it because it's so sound. And so those are my top two in the space that you mentioned, related to the racial justice right now. I also read old stuff. I'm an English language and literature major, so incidents in the life of a slave girl, Harriet Jacobs, like, oh man, when the slave narratives are really interesting to me because we whine a lot, and we think we're going through something. But then to be able to hear the mindset, the psychology, the faith, the hope of people who were in much worse. Our conditions aren't great, don't get me wrong, but we're in much worse predicaments. Keeps me going on, keeps me fighting.
For that legacy, yeah. You got any books you want to recommend, Daniel? It could be anything, actually.
I'm a fiction guy, and before me and Razel started writing this book and doing all these events and stuff got busy, really busy. I also have a 8-month-old at home that was born on Easter during the pandemic. So my reading has slowed down since it came out on November 3rd. But before then, I was devouring Louise Erdrich's canon. I read Love Medicine about a year ago now, and I hadn't read her work before. And she reminds me a lot of Toni Morrison, who's my favorite writer. She just got this way of braiding a narrative and discussing really, really dark human material with such a graceful paintbrush. She writes beautiful, beautiful sentences. And incidentally, she does deal with the topic in a different way because she's a Native American writer. And she writes about displaced tribes and land being taken and land being bamboozled and the poverty effects on Native Americans when all this was happening, and alcoholism and drugs. And she's just powerful. She's a phenomenal writer. And I recommend anyone that likes fiction. And if you like braided narratives and you like Toni Morrison, you like Colin McCann, pick it up. It's definitely, you will learn something about life, and you'll be moved by the beauty of her art, because to write those kind of sentences is art.
She's a master for sure. No question. Gentlemen, this was phenomenal. So I'm going to close by asking you where, if people want to engage more with you, is there a website that you both have collectively, or social media? What if they want to keep connecting, where should they go?
Yeah, we both have websites that say the same thing. We probably should do something collective. Thanks for that, Julie. But mine is razeljones.com, Razel Jones.com. You want me to do yours, Daniel?
It might as well.
Okay. DanielAbbottFiction.com. So you can find us, and Abbott is ABBOTT. All right, double up all those letters.
Double
right?
Doubles. I even had to look at that. I was like, oh, it is doubles.
Yeah. So
yeah, I'm thinking we need to see a wounds.com
I know
website coming.
We gotta work on that. We gotta work on that. So yeah, those are our websites where you can find us. Social media for me, any social media, pretty much you can find me at my unique name, which is at Razel Jones. So yeah, I'm very simple. Daniel.
I'm Abbott Fiction for Twitter and Instagram. Facebook, you have to be a friend of a friend to a friend request me on Facebook. I'm a little bit more family friends.
Introvert.
Yeah, and I think Facebook's become, I mean, I love it obviously for this and for these kind of social things. It's a little bit different on the personal level, I think. People are doing other things on the personal level. Any final words, gentlemen, before we head off?
My main final word is thank you so much to Warwicks and to you, Julie, for having us and for creating this platform. As I know you know, to push a book out in the midst of pandemic is a challenge, just like it's a challenge for all of our bookstores and all of our businesses. So please support Warwicks, even if you're not buying Wounds. Now, we would prefer for you to also buy Wounds while you're in there, but even if you don't, support Warwicks and keep this platform available for the business to flourish, even in the midst of challenging times.
And thank you.
What he said.
What he said, I love it.
It's been great. Thank you so much for having us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and it's a pleasure to lift both of your voices up. So everybody, buy the book. So with that, good night, Facebook. I'm going to take us off of Facebook Live. So good night.
Good night, Facebook.
Yeah.